Hello, everyone, and welcome to the ASCM's The Chain podcast. I'm excited to be joined today by Linda Dunn. Linda is the faculty director and assistant professor for the Master's in Supply Chain Management program at Georgetown University School of Continuing Studies. Linda is a passionate speaker, an author, and researcher on how supply chain management intersects with corporate social responsibility, change management, communications, and organizational agility. In today's episode, we're going to dive into some critical issues on food waste. We'll explore some of the causes, the impact on both production and inventory, as well as the role of technology and the consumer in mitigating this global challenge. Linda, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Abe. This is an area I'm very passionate about.
Yeah, and it never seems to be off the front page of the news.
Yes.
It seems like, historically, whenever we wanted to describe something that was insurmountable, we would always refer to solving world hunger or food issues. In terms of food waste and security and insecurity, are things different today than perhaps they were 5 or 10 years ago, or are we still dealing with some of the same challenges?
So I really see two sides to this. When you think about it, the good news is that there's greater awareness than ever, right? So consumers see this as a problem. They want to solve the problem. So that's very positive, right? But on the other side, food waste has increased. And so it's increased in the US. And then it's also increased when you think globally, partially because we have middle income really increasing in many countries, right? So as that happens, there's going to be more consumption. There's going to be more food waste.
And you indicated there's more awareness. Is it because the media is paying more attention to it, or is it the consumers requesting more information?
It's both. I think definitely as we have social media now, one person can make a huge difference. One person can show someone throwing food, very good food, into a waste basket, and then that gets a lot of attention, right? So I think it's both the type of media we have, and I do think it's a change in the shift in the way people perceive their position in the world, that it's not all just about me, and that I have to look longer term and have to care about the world we live in and the other people that we live with.
Well, let's get into some of the causes on the food waste. Are we talking about production? Are we talking about distribution? Give me an indication as to, where we're seeing the majority of the problem, because from my readings and almost all the information, we've got more than enough food for everybody in this world, but yet we're not getting it to the right people. Where's our, pinch points here?
Let's talk about where a little bit and then why a little bit. So on the where, it really does happen all the nodes through the supply chain, right? From the farms all the way to the consumers. And the consumers are the largest piece of it overall. But, every single node has an issue. Distribution in the US is probably not as big an issue because we have all the reefer trucks. Things still happen and there's still loss and food waste, but probably not as big as distribution when you look at other countries being why they waste some of the food they waste. We talked about residents being the largest. Farms is pretty large too, and that can be everything from severe weather, insects. It can also be they've produced, but it's not worth harvesting. And one of the issues is also, this is both a consumer issue, and I'll say it's an issue for farmers trying to get it through the supply chain, is the desire for the really appealing food aesthetics, right? So that farmer, if it doesn't look so good, maybe they won't even try to move that crop further down the supply chain. And when you're in the grocery store, the consumer wants plentiful, bountiful shelves and beautiful produce, right? All of those contribute to it. So I think you've got the food aesthetics, you've got some, acts of God, I'll call them. And then we have a big issue of over portioning and just larger pack sizes. And this, again, happens all along the food supply chain. You have this in food service, right, where it's very large, US in particular, very large portions, right? But also manufacturing pack sizes that are significantly larger than maybe they're needed for the households, right? So as you look, households are shrinking, but the pack sizes are still fairly large, and that can create food waste because that was the only size you could purchase it in.
it seems like we've gone back to where we were before. Have we learned anything from the portion sizes that we experienced during the pandemic?
I'm going to shift from food for a minute just to the toilet paper analogy, right? You saw people walking out of the big box stores with these, I don't know, 48 rolls. And yet that left that there were issues for those who couldn't obtain the toilet paper, right? With food, if you think about that too, what does the household need? Maybe it just needs with toilet paper 12, or it's a half a loaf of bread instead of a large 2-pound bag of, let's say, nuts or something like that. It should be a smaller portion. It should be resealable. How are we thinking about how the consumer is actually using the product and the size of households and the change in demographics, even with the aging demographic?
Yeah.
Okay?
It's interesting. We talked to a lot of supply chain professionals in terms of, the consumer's experience in a grocery store or, in a shopping center, and the concept of full shelves and ensuring that we have multiple, not only varieties, but, the significant volume of each of the varieties in there. Are we able to strike the balance for that consumer's expectations for full shelves in that portion size, or are we still, the expectation is we're going to have a full shelf and we're going to have 10 different varieties of ketchup on every shelf?
Right. I think we really need to try to reset consumer expectations, which is not easy, right?
Mhm.
That's been over time, we've set those expectations. But it's just like with portion size. If you can say it's about quality, I can still make something look really good without having a lot of it, just through how I'm merchandising. And maybe there's more merchandising tools, maybe there's ways to convey that there's more product available or the freshness of the product in other ways. And I think that's going to help reset the consumer expectation that I just need to see a lot and I'll pick the best out of that pile I see.
In certain cases, we've got overproduction, as you indicated, in certain regions, and in other regions, we have underproduction or unavailability, food scarcity. A huge question here. How do you strike the balance between that overproduction and that demand uncertainty that we're trying to solve almost on a daily basis?
Yeah, I really think we are having more tools to help us with not just inventory management at a site, but allocation to stores too. So when you look at where is the need, being able to use more tools to be able to do that type of allocation can be helpful. And we know we have different types of issues too. We don't have food in areas that might be food deserts because stores have closed down and decided they're not going to necessarily serve the communities. And that's a real issue. But understanding, I think, what is the layout that you need to get all of the products to? How are the demands shifting over time? Is it weather related? Is it, where do I need it most? And then trying to figure out, are there ways to optimize, whether it's distribution or production in a way that makes sense that I can serve areas that today are less served than they should be. So it's going to take some thoughtful planning, I think, and intentionality in trying to say, I need to serve these areas more. And I have so much over here. And while maybe I can charge a lot of money over here, I need to rethink what I'm doing as far as my business practices.
Linda, you referred to the criticality of the cold chain and the distribution to ensure that we're, not only sequencing the harvesting and getting it to the shelf, but, getting it to insecure communities as well. Give me a sense of the distribution system and how critical that is and where some of the gaps and some of the, opportunities are.
Well, I think distribution is fundamental, right? And I think a long time ago, if you go back, people thought supply chain was logistics, right? Sort of like, oh, it's the same thing. Well, it's a little larger, but it's certainly, so critical, as you've pointed out. I would just say that having the right distribution, and let's talk about like making sure the integrity of the cold chain is kept, right? So making sure you have the Internet of Things providing information back, understanding that you really do have a transportation management system with tracking to understand if something got held up, or even, when something's get delivered, how long have the doors been open? That could hurt the integrity of the food. So I think between technology, whether that be the actual trucks or technology in the trucks, and then policies and process in distribution, they play a role as to, how do you get it there with the integrity? How do you optimize your routes so you can get to the places maybe that are at a reasonable cost that might be more difficult if you don't have a warehouse nearby or something like that. So I think it's again using some of those optimization tools to really make sure you're utilizing distribution in a way that does not cause food waste and actually gets the food to the areas you
Yeah.
want to get it to.
You brought up a couple of points there, Linda, and that was on integrity and tracking and ensuring that we have that traceability on, the product from the, obviously from the farmer all the way to the shelf of, even in the refrigerator, ensuring that we do have, the appropriate tracking systems. Technology has enabled it in a lot of ways in terms of the digital transformation. But I'm not seeing the availability of the information as much as I'd like to on the consumer side. So are we getting better at tracking and tracing, back to source of where this product came from, or are we still a little bit behind the curve on that?
We're certainly getting better because one, we've been mandated to get better with the Food Safety Modernization Act, and really part two of that with making sure that there is a chain of custody for those products that are highly perishable, right? Like so for the produce and stuff. You go back 10 years ago, and if there was a recall on tomatoes, or we've had so many recalls, right? People wouldn't know where they were from necessarily.
Yeah.
You could not identify because they get
Yeah.
aggregated when they're getting sorted, and then they go back out and no one's able to track and trace. So I think there are improvements there, and I hope to see that the level of recalls that occur within produce can decrease. I guess that would be an interesting thing to really measure over time. And again, it comes in, anyone who's been in the food industry, it does come in ebbs and flows, or I shouldn't say ebbs. Sometimes it's overwhelming how many times we've had, E. coli in our salads or something. But I think we should see a reduction based on that traceability. And then again, I think companies can go beyond what's just regulated into really making sure they are doing the right things so that when something gets reaggregated, they're scanning it, they're labeling it, they actually know where everything is as they send things out within their supply chain.
Linda, you referenced a couple of significant cases of illnesses and foodborne challenges that we've had contaminated food over the past couple of years. I know packaging has an opportunity to mitigate some of that, but it seems like as we've progressed in terms of tracking and tracing, we're still experiencing, contaminated foods causing illness, and oftentimes worse than that. How do we, use technology? How do we use packaging and the handling of the food, not only, in terms of the processing, but in terms of the shelf life? How do we enable our, a little bit better information so that we do mitigate or minimize the chance of the, contaminated food?
Yeah, that has so many tentacles. Let me just say, first of all, when you're thinking of packaging to reduce food waste, the bare minimum is, are you protecting it in transit, right? So that something doesn't get crushed and ruined just because of the packaging that it has. So I would say packaging plays, a heavy role just in securing it all the way through transport and into the stores, et cetera. But we also see developments in packaging and even in what you can do with foods. And first I'm going to go to very elemental, and I probably should have mentioned this before, but when you just think of freezing foods, right? So you stop that process of really continuing with the different issues that could happen in your refrigerator. It's not going to last as long as in your freezer based on the ability of the cold to reduce those microorganisms, right? So you have that happening, and that is one way, when you look at food waste, produce is really high. But if you look at frozen food waste, it's actually a small percent. And not every country or place has the ability to store or, that much frozen food.
Mhm.
But it certainly is an easy way to slow down that aging process of food. Then that's sort of what I'll call the older process. We have all these technologies. You have vacuum packaging, you have high pressure processing, right? Where you can kill some of those microorganisms. And so these types of things really extend the shelf life. That's amazing. So it can extend it significantly. Still need to keep it at temp, but when you've taken that out or you've been able to uh, get rid of some of the again, the risks that are associated with the products, they can be kept longer. And I think we'll continue to have those types of packaging options grow over just, a simple seal with film and things like that.
Really interesting. You brought up a couple of key points there, and specifically on the international side and how things are different domestically versus internationally, not only in terms of quantity, but in terms of space. When we visit our friends overseas, they don't have those monster refrigerators that take up a wall. They have relatively small size refrigerators. They generally shop for 1 to 2 days. Extremely different type of demand in terms of the supply chain and the frequency of the product and the distribution here. We have a very different mindset here. Give me a sense of how it's different internationally versus domestically when you're talking about volume and you're talking about purchasing not only for your refrigerator, but your freezer as well. Very different internationally than it is domestically in the US.
It is if you've traveled to locations and again, developed countries. These are not developed, just very different practices as you mentioned, how often they get their food. In the US, we have a lot of unplanned purchases compared to planned and going for what you need. It's, well, maybe I need it, or maybe there's a special. A lot of our promotions and things like that encourage purchasing multiple packs. I think that's another, haven't really talked about the marketing
I
side
get
of it.
that all the time, Linda. Buy 2, get 3 free. I don't need to. I needed 1, but now I'm buying 2 and I'm getting 5.
Yes, exactly. And if it's a perishable item, it's an issue, right? Everything has a shelf life. And particularly if it's something that has to be refrigerated, and this happens. And so that's something else that can be looked at as well to try to reduce it. But so in international locations, there's an understanding that you don't want to just store just in case, right? It's just different culturally. The refrigerators will be smaller. You might not, the use of ice is even very different, right? It's not used or put in everything, and not everything is refrigerated if it doesn't have to be, right? It can be in the basement or at a cool temperature, not at a cold temperature. And so again, we've created some norms, I guess, in the US that make it that we store more and more. And then what happens is we don't have visibility. It's similar to a business. If you did this in a business, and I would say you have lots of, let's say you have a disorganized warehouse where you had the same product in multiple places. That's what a house is like, right? Oh, I've got some downstairs in my storage. I have it in my little cupboard here, and then I have it on my shelves when I need it. I don't have control of my inventory. And if you had that in a business where you didn't know how many you had of something, you're going to have expirations, right? And you want first in, first out. Consumers don't always do that. Someone started on this pack of bread before using this pack of bread or whatever might be there, right? It's not always based on the date. So if businesses are doing a good practice, they know all their inventory, they are using those processes of rotating and understanding first in, first out. But then on the consumer side, we have a long way to go, right? And I think for those in the international households who just don't have as much in so many different places, because the houses aren't necessarily of the same size and with so many different places to put your food.
It's interesting. Being an educator on inventory management, I think it would be beneficial if we had a course for consumers on LIFO, last in, first out, or first in, first out methods of inventory management for our purchases and our food. Let's dig into that a little bit because inventory management is, to your point, in manufacturing and in production, critical because I need to know what I have, where it is, what its shelf life is. Labeling in terms of
Uh,
providing information to me is critical for inventory management. If it's not labeled, I can't find it. So we're talking about labeling on food, not just on packaging, but on fruit and all types of information that provides data. Are expiration dates and labeling helping the inventory management for individuals, or is it just the companies right now that are seeing the benefit of labeling right now? How do we, get better information to the consumer through labeling?
well, even companies, when you are the one not manufacturing but using the food maybe to produce in food
Mhm.
service, there's dates without consistency in the labeling. It is a major issue. You have Best Buy, which doesn't mean it's bad, it's just best, right? You have use by, you have sell by. There's tremendous confusion. And as a matter of fact, not too long ago, the FDA was taking, they get feedback on questions and things. And this was one of the ones they were focused on because they know a large amount of food gets wasted based on confusion with these dates and what do they really mean. And even for someone who is not a consumer, but again, a business and food service, or maybe a retailer, if something's going to go out of date, you can potentially contact the manufacturer, assuming you have a relationship, it's not through just some other distributor, and say, what is the maximum shelf life on this? And may I have an extension? Let's say you're using it to produce something. So the consumer would never see that it's beyond that date. Oftentimes, some of the products can be lengthened. And so again, think of all the times those things have been thrown out
Yeah.
when it could have been longer. So it's a major issue. I have seen figures, I wouldn't want to quote it exactly, but it is a large piece of why consumers certainly do it.
Mhm.
Businesses have a little better sense of it working directly with the manufacturers,
Mhm.
but even that can be confusing if they're not labeled well, or if that manufacturer wants to protect its brand, yes, but they're really not looking at realistic dates that it could go to. They're
Yeah.
shortening those dates just to be very, very safe from their side as to quality.
Interesting. You talk about, improvements in terms of labeling, in terms of packaging, in terms of logistics. Give me where you see the major improvements in terms of solutions to reduce the waste.
So first, I'm going to talk more about something that's not technology or new, and this is donating the food,
Uh,
right? So both France and Italy have food donation laws that are, in France, they mandate it for large supermarkets. In Italy, they encourage it. So one has
mhm,
sort of the stick and one has sort of the carrot.
mhm,
US, we've always, for many years, had the Good Samaritan law related to food, but so many companies do not think through, how do I donate my food? And there's lots of organizations, local, but also national, that you can work with to donate food. So if I'm in food service or if I'm a grocery store, here's food that can go to school children who are coming to these after school activities. And there's lots of great organizations that work with kids. You also have just food banks overall
mhm,
that things can be donated to as well. And then, of course, it can go to things like feed for animals, right? So there's a pecking order that you can do with food donation. That's first. And while it takes a little bit of work and you have to have the space to store it before you move it, it can be done, and it's major because you're hitting, think of that, the triple bottom line. You're hitting, decreasing costs, you are helping socially, and then also the environment, right? So it's a triple win. Other areas of improvements have been some of the technology, the
mhm,
optimization in inventory and in forecasting, using things that aren't just the prior forecasting methods of using historical information, right? That's your own information. Really looking for information like on demand sensing, what's out there as far as a pulse, as opposed to just what has occurred, and looking at your historical data, and also external factors. Weather is a major one for what people do. Will they buy? Will they go out? Different things like that. So if you're better able to incorporate different variables and different methods into your forecasting to make it more robust, that's certainly helpful. And then on the inventory side, again, being able to do more optimization, as well as the distribution. And even things like, use one more when we think of technology and what we're seeing. I've gone to a lot of AI conferences, seen AI within food service specifically. And an example, a strong example that's being used is maintenance, right? So if you can use AI as a predictor for, will my refrigerator go out? You're going to save the food before it does, right? And I know I've heard that on the reefer trucks, large company doing predictive analytics through AI with high degree of accuracy. That stops a load from just, having an issue where the whole truck would be full. So these kind of developments where we can use it for technology for analytics to predict issues will help us reduce those issues.
Are we getting to the point that AI can help the consumer as well? As you just indicated, some of the labeling, we're getting to smart fridges and telling me, something, you got a couple of products here that are going to go bad in a couple of days. Are we getting to that point, or is this just a little bit further down in the future, the Jetsons?
Yeah, it's a little further, but maybe not as long as we think, right? Probably it's more like, how often will you replace your refrigerator? Because there are smart refrigerators with the cameras for visual recognition to be able to say, yeah, you know that thing stuck way in the back? You bought that about a week ago, better use it, right? Or you've opened, you've only had, I don't know how many times. There's a difference. We talked about labeling. But a big issue too, Abe, is, okay, once you open food, it's different than the date on, right? And knowing what those rules are and why for different types of food is confusing for the consumer. Having an AI app or something to just quickly be able to scan something and say, how long can I eat this for, right? Or how long have I had this deli meat open? Because someone else in the household opened it, right? So again, there's always this risk of privacy and other things like what's in your fridge, but I think the technology will get there. It just will take a time. And again, the replacement of large pieces of equipment in a household, that only happens every so often, right? But it will come with more and more technology like that to help the consumer really identify what they have and be more visible as to when they need to use it by.
A little bit of a shift here, Linda. We touched on it in a number of different areas, and that is the concept of sustainability and organizations, putting the appropriate practices into place. We've seen a little bit of a sort of a pause on sustainability, rhetoric over the past couple of years because of being defensible. Can you prove that you are sustainable as an organization? Is it going to take government regulations, or are companies going to do a move first in terms of implementing sustainable policies for food?
We've seen a lot of improvement in what companies are trying to do. And some don't talk about what they're doing because they're afraid they'll be labeled greenwashing or you get attacked, right? So I actually think there's more being done than is sometimes even shared. But that doesn't mean we have a long way to go to really reduce our carbon footprint, improve, our land, reduce our landfill usage, and really make sure we're not using bad chemicals and a whole bunch of areas. What I would say is that when you look at it, there's this progress that's being made. You talked about a pause a little bit. I would say that regulation is going to be the thing that moves us more, instead of just sort of incremental, continuous improvement, it's going to be that step change is going to come through regulation. You've already seen it,
Yeah.
some with the EU and
Right.
requirements there. If you're a multinational company and you
Yeah.
have operations over there, you're going to have to do more reporting, more due diligence. And I think that here you might see that. And the reason regulation can be helpful, I'm not for huge amounts, but certainly food safety, and as we think of food waste, if you do it, it levels the playing field. Let's look at France. If it required all major grocery stores to do it, it's no longer a disadvantage if one does
Right.
it, right? Because they're trying to care and be a concerned corporate citizen, right? Everybody has to do it, and it levels the playing field. That's where I think regulation has some power. And again, incentives. Also put the incentives out there to encourage, if it's easier to waste than to compost, how do we change that equation through some incentives, perhaps?
It's interesting. You talked about traceability in terms of government regulations, and you referenced, France and some of the countries in the EU. The proclamation a couple of years ago in the EUDR and the deforestation regulations had to trace it back to the hectare that you grew the product in. This is only going to start to expand. It's not going to narrow down our focus. I think there are 10 or 11 products that they've identified, and that indicates either moving in or moving out of the country. So it's not just within a local region. This is across the entire enterprise. Large organizations can do that. They have the technology, they have the resources, they have the people. Small and medium-sized organizations struggle with compliance issues. How do we level the playing field, as you're talking, in terms of all the players having access or the ability to support the regulations and to report out appropriately?
Yeah, that is a hard part, because when you have even a shift, let's say, in the labeling could be big for a small company, right? I think there's a couple of things. Again, I'll say governments can do incentives for small and medium-sized businesses, because those are the ones that grow into the bigger businesses, right?
Yeah.
That's where the innovation happens, is with a lot of the small businesses. So there's a reason to try to help them. The second is, I think some of the large companies can really, again, if they're not a direct competitor, how do you help your suppliers that are smaller,
Yeah.
right? I mean, you want them to succeed. You want them to be able to report on the sustainability initiatives, track and trace. Is there training you can provide? Are there systems you can provide? If you're already purchasing, can you purchase a license for certain ones? I know there's lots of suppliers and you could not do that across the board, but maybe there is something you can set up. And lastly, I'd say technology is reducing in price. I mean, there's open source software. I think the cost can be reduced if we really look at what technology, maybe it's not the top of the line, but is being created, or there's an open source, and maybe, again, several smaller companies, they can act as a group, right? Let's share learnings. Let's agree on a platform. Let's leverage our size. Those are some opportunities for them to get into this. We're not going to make it without the small and medium-sized companies. So it's going to be a combination of maybe some government, and then some businesses, and then just technology becoming more and more accessible to anyone of any size company.
So we've got the producers, we've got government, we've got the small and medium sized. Now let's look at the consumer. What can the consumers do, or can they do anything to make a difference to help organizations understand the implications of food waste?
Well, I would say first, you need to measure or understand your own waste. And whether you're a business or a consumer, there's so many parallels, right? You can do a food waste audit. What's in your trash can? What are you throwing out, right? You can, businesses, that's a simple, non-technical thing you can do, but it's really eye-opening. Is there a lot of lettuce, produce? What are you throwing out on a consistent basis? Do some food audits. So that's one.
Yeah, if it were money, I would recognize it in the trash can because it's an old banana or an old, fruit. I won't see that cost in there. And so there's a lot of invisibility in terms of a lot of, shielding the actual cost of the food waste for the consumer.
Oh, Absolutely. And I'll get back to the consumer because that's your question, but let's talk about even in food service. Do you train your employees to ask, do you want your tomato on that? What if you don't like tomato? How many get thrown out? Again, you could do a food waste audit, but asking that not only saves you cost, which is amazing, right? But it pleases the customer more.
Yeah.
And you've saved that food. And same with sauces. You order something for carry out and they give you a whole bunch of things that you don't even use or want. It's all waste. So on the consumer side, they can tell the people proactively, I don't want this. I don't use duck sauce with my Chinese food, or I don't want mayonnaise or whatever sauce, right? So I think consumers, knowing there's an issue, can be proactive about telling the businesses, I don't need this, I don't want this. There's a lot of waste that can be saved that way. They increase their own visibility in their homes. They can reduce, I'll say, the inventory issue. We talked about it, about being in multiple places. Maybe you have once every 2 weeks, you do your own inventory like you would somewhere else. And then you look at a date, and if it's close to a month away, and I'm thinking for dry goods for this, you would say, okay, I'm going to donate that. It goes to Manna, it goes to whomever, the food bank. And so just if you make it a process, just like you would a business, I really think consumers, if they could take some of the business processes, it would be very, very helpful to them. So again, the awareness piece is important, actually taking that inventory, taking the time to do it, intentional shopping, and then again, tell the businesses, I don't want this. And that way they'll reduce waste.
Linda, just the topic that we can go on forever, not only in terms of food security, food insecurity, and I think we're making progress. It's obviously a conversation that needs to continue on. I really want to thank Linda for sharing not only your insights, but some of the things that we can do as consumers and as businesses to address the food waste and the role that we all play in reducing food insecurity and availability across the globe. Remember, every small action counts, and together we can make a difference to reduce food waste. Thanks again, Linda. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Ray.
All the best.